can tell her, you can tell her anything. She's a real good listener. You can tell her anything.
Hi guys, this is Teresa, the host of You Can Tell Me Anything, the podcast where I have comedians confess a secret they've never told anybody before. Well, today is a very special episode because technically it is a comedian confessing something, but that comedian is myself. This is a solo episode. What? That's crazy. That is what? I'm just going to talk by myself? Yes, I am. And judging by how I got that sentence out, this is going to go real great. But one of the reasons for doing this is, well, because the guest that I had scheduled had to cancel, and I do have a lot of great problem solving skills, and I was like, I can rebook, which I did, and then that guest also canceled. And then I was like, you know what, I actually have a lot of secrets and a lot of things I want to talk about. And the truth is, the reason I started this podcast was because I feel like I'm a very open person, and I do feel like I'm a great listener, and I really like to talk to people in more longer form, deeper conversations about pieces of our past. Because I think you get to know someone a lot by the stories they tell about who they used to be. It informs you of who they are. But anyways, all that being said, I, in addition to being a listener, also have a lot of stuff that I feel like I enjoy sharing with people. I'm sure there's some sort of word for it, but it's not that I have a lot of secrets like in a sinister or like malicious way. It's just that I tend to have a lot of layers, as everybody does. This is why I think this podcast is so fun for me to do, because I really believe that we all have so many layers, and that's why so many of the stories you've heard have been so interesting. But anyways, so that being said, I constantly have things that I'm just like, oh, I never told you this, but here's blank about me. So that's one reason I started the podcast. The other reason I started the podcast was because I love making confessions, not necessarily consciously, but, and I probably do this last, I've talked about this a little bit on the podcast, but, I used to, there's a word for it in Chinese, gao bai, which just means confess your love. I used to do that a lot. I would kind of like keep things inside and not talk about my feelings. And then all of a sudden one day be like, blah, here's everything I feel and everything I've ever felt. So anyways, this podcast is sort of to deal with that. Wow, what a long-winded explanation. Boy, if you guys don't like my voice, you've probably already turned this off by now. But if you do, buckle down, because I'm going to be talking for the rest of this podcast. Okay, well, let's just get right into it. I always ask my guests for a good confession, so you know what? I will do the same. I'm going to start with a good confession. Here's something I guess I will brag about. It's straight up just a brag. I recently did the NBC stand-up competition. They do it every year. It used to be called Stand Up for Diversity. I went to Houston. I flew out there to do the competition, and I made it to the semifinals. And today I found out I didn't make it to the finals, and honestly, I was feeling a little bit bummed. But now I am here talking to you guys, and I just want to use this as my good confession, because I'm happy that I made it to the semifinals and that I worked hard for it. And I don't think, I think all the judges are very wise and experienced. So if they don't think I'm ready, then I'm not ready for the finals. And that just means I have to work harder. And so that's my good confession, because I actually do feel pretty proud of making it that far, because that's something that I think even 3 years ago, I don't think I would have made it that far. So it's just a little nice milestone to be like, keep working hard, but also, you've made some progress. Wow, that was very uncomfortable for me. I hate bragging about stand-up stuff, and I really want to erase that, but I won't. Okay. Anyways, so this confession I have today is actually a little bit more on the serious side. And it's something that I've touched upon before, like elements I've touched on before in this podcast, but I've never really said this to anyone. And I've never talked about on stage. But I actually feel like this week is really relevant for me to talk about this because of the threat in the government of erasing the identity of transgender people. So if you guys aren't following the news, that is a proposed bill. It's not, nothing's been no action's been taken, but it's very disheartening to hear that on a national level that people in the government want to basically erase transgender from the dictionary. They basically want to make the definition of gender specific to how you were born biologically. If you guys are bummed out about this news and you feel like you want to take action, there's a lot of good organizations out there you can donate to. The Trans Law Center, it helps provide legal counsel to trans people who can't afford it, and just to keep people educated. And of course, there's the Trevor Project, which provides, it's a suicide hotline for LGBT youth, and those are both great organizations. There's so many more, so definitely, take your time and research that. But okay, that's the last I'll say about this, the political side. But that's what's going on in the climate right now, and so I this is something that I've never really thought about confessing on this podcast, but because of everything going on, and because I've kind of touched on my sexuality before, I just decided, you know what, I'm going to talk about it. So my confession is, when I was 19, I used to think that I was a boy. And when I say I think, I mean I explored, I questioned, and I was genuinely I genuinely researched how to transition from being a woman or girl. I guess I was still sort of a teenager, to becoming a boy. And at the time, I hadn't come out to myself yet as gay or queer, and I hadn't lost my virginity. So there's a lot of things I hadn't done and I hadn't really explored, and I was very much at the beginning of my journey in all this. And so it came from a place where I felt really out of place, and I was very much just did not feel like I belonged to my body. And I went to a very liberal school. I went to NYU, and I knew trans people in high school. I knew trans people in college. So this was something that I hadn't really thought of till when I was 19. For some reason, I just really identified that way. And I really did explore it. This is a period I call questioning, because I will say it was a transitional phase, but for a good chunk of the year, that is the secret I believed in my heart. And I was kind of collecting data and talking to people and trying to understand more about what my identity was. Okay, so I'll kind of tell you guys the story a little bit. Basically, it feels like a lifetime ago, but around this time, I had come back from studying abroad. I lived in Paris for about half a year. I went there to study French. I had a lot of it was a great time, and I really did enjoy my time there, and it really feels like a very, very long time ago. But while I was there, let's just say I grew in a lot of ways, some good, some bad. Had a lot of experiences that I think at the time I was just feeling like, this isn't like specifically related to my identity, but I'm just trying to paint you guys a little bit of a picture of where I was then. I was feeling very like it was a phase of growing, and I was very lost and very confused, and stuff had happened that I hadn't really processed or dealt with while I was there, and wouldn't have the tools to deal with till I came, for years. So that's kind of where I was. I was already in a very like unstable and questioning my life point of view, and definitely had undiagnosed depression and anxiety and was hallucinating. So all that was happening. And then I was beginning to question my sexuality. And so how I felt was that I've always been attracted to men, boys, at the time. Well, I wasn't attracted to men when I was 13. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but, I was attracted to boys growing up, and also attracted to girls, but definitely attracted to boys. And in my mind, being attracted to boys meant you were not gay, because being gay means you don't like boys. So I was thinking in a very not negative, like bad, but like negative space. I was thinking from a process of elimination point of view. I was thinking the definition is whatever you don't like is what you are. Instead of just thinking like what you like could define who you are. So that's a little bit more of a positive way of viewing it. But, I was coming from a more negative point of view. And so I thought, well, the definition of being gay is you don't like the opposite sex. And I do. So therefore, I'm not gay. Dumb logic, right? I wasn't really aware of like fluidity and pansexual and bisexual. I really just thought, I knew there were bisexual people, but really bi erasure very much in the media affected me growing up. So what I thought, what I thought of when I thought of bisexuals was, like sort of party girls, making out with girls at parties, threesomes, that sort of thing, which probably still happens, but it's just a very limited scope of what it means to be bisexual. So, okay. All that being said, I was already beginning to question my sexuality. And I just really did not feel right in my body. So then I went through this phase where I would look in the mirror and I would see myself as a man. Actually, not a man, a boy, like B-O-I. I saw myself as a boy. But really, I did. That's kind of a joke, but I would sort of get these men's wife beaters from Target and actually Kmart, the Kmart in Astor Square. Which is a horrible Kmart. But that's where I went because that's where I went to school. And I would get these wife beater packs, men's packs, put them on and wear these loose baggy jeans and just like kind of hold my hair up. Real bougie. Like I didn't have the guts to cut it that short. And just like imagine myself as a boy. And it felt right. And I was like, well, maybe this is what I am. And then it was the summer and I went home and I remember thinking like, I think I figured it out. Cause what it was is I felt really not right. Like I hadn't come out to myself yet. So what that feeling was me trying to define myself and figure out where I belonged and like find a resting place because I really didn't feel stable. And I really felt so trapped within my body because I was in a sorority and I did pageants growing up and I danced, and which all of that is totally fine and I loved and I really like don't regret any of that. That's so much a part of who I was and still am. Like that's my identity. But a lot of those worlds at the time were pretty heteronormative, very much like emphasis on being a specific type of woman, a lot of emphasis on being, like sort of the male gaze on the female aesthetic, even though a lot of those organizations champion like empowerment and feminism, it's like a very limited, not necessarily intersectional feminism. So, being involved in these groups, I really just started feeling trapped. Like I was like, I don't understand. Like I don't quite feel like being a straight girl is who I am. Yet I do know that I like men and they elicit strong reactions emotionally in me. And physically sometimes. So I started thinking, well, you know what it is that I'm a boy because that's where this conflicting feeling's coming from. Because here's the thing. I've talked about this on the pod before, but at this time I wasn't having any sex. I was a virgin. But when you don't have sex and you like being sexually active, you end up doing a lot of other things, right? So like blowjobs, whatever, mostly that, I guess. I don't know. I wasn't being that... I wasn't being that adventurous back then. Pretty much just blowjobs. But anyways, I liked blowjobs. I liked penis. I liked having sex. I liked sex things with boys. And I liked the idea of, whatever, fooling around with boys. I was like, I think I'm a gay boy trapped in a girl's body. And I think that's why I don't quite feel right saying that I'm like a queer woman because I still like these boys. And I also don't quite feel right just... being a straight boy because I do like boys. And I was like, being a gay boy would explain why when I hook up with boys, this is a true thing that sometimes I still do, but a lot less, but I used to do. When I hooked up with boys, I would have to think about girls to really like get off. And at the time I was like, well, maybe I'm a gay boy. And so the girl stuff is like, whatever society telling me I'm supposed to like girls. but I still can't stay away from boys. And so once I thought this, I was like, I think this is it. I figured it out. And there was like, it didn't, I will say like in hindsight, it wasn't like it clicked so much. It's like, what's that book by Shel Silverstein? The Missing Piece. The missing piece is looking for his other piece, right? And you guys know the story, but I'll just briefly summarize it. He's like a little wedge, and he goes up to little holes and little circles with a wedge missing, and tries to find his other piece. And he keeps looking for people that almost fit. They almost fit, but they're not quite. Eventually, it's a really cute story because eventually he finds one that he likes. He doesn't quite fit, but then they just kind of make it work, and then they're fine. What I kind of felt like was like I found this, I found my missing piece, or so I thought. It didn't quite fit, but I was like determined to just be like, I'm tired. I just want to figure out what I am, and then not worry about it and live my life. And so when I was like, well, maybe I'm a gay boy, it didn't like click. It, in hindsight, I'm like, it wasn't quite right, but I wanted so badly to like have my aha moment that I was like, that's it. That's what I am. And then I felt so much relief, and I was like, oh my God, what I need to start this process. I need to figure this out. I need transitions. I need to be who I really am so the world can see me as how I see myself. So this was around the summertime, when I was around 19, and I was back home for the summer, and I started doing this thing. I started researching because I was very much questioning, and I was like, thank God for the internet. Other people probably have gone through this. I mean, they definitely have. And I was like, I'm an Asian gay boy, and there's other Asian gay boys out there, and I'm going to find them, and they're going to make me feel like I'm at home. So I started Googling and reading people's stories, and I joined some forums, and I even posted how I felt on them. I created like burner accounts and was making, just really afraid someone would figure it out. And one of the biggest things I found that made me really continue with this journey was I found a website of a trans man who had transitioned, like within the last year, or was still going through his transition. And he was born a biological female, and he was Asian. He, similar body type as me, went to NYU, and there were a couple other similarities. I can't remember. I think he was also Taiwanese. So there were a lot of things, and he was around my age, and I think maybe he was a little older and had graduated or something. But when I read, and he had a website, and he was sort of like talking about his transition and answering questions and putting it out there. And I remember finding it and being like, oh my God, this is a sign. Like, it has to be, because so many similarities. And not only that, but like, even as I'm saying this right now, it's weird because I'm alone in my room. Well, my dog's here, but I like feel like crying because I really haven't talked about this with anyone. But I remember thinking, that's me. This is my story. And just feeling so relieved that I wasn't alone, and there are other people out there, and that he had gone through the transition and he looked hot. Not that it matters. You can totally transition even if you're not hot. But I mean, like, at the time I was living this sort of like straight girl, hot girl identity, like trying to fit into that world, like, wearing the heels, getting the male gaze, going to clubs. So there was a part of me that's like, selfishly, like, if I transition, I want to be a hot boy, because not that it matters, but whatever, it kind of did. So to me, not that it should, but it did to me, and I'm being honest about that. So it was nice to see this hot boy and his website, and I remember that being like, okay, well, I don't know what it's going to take, but I'm going to transition. And okay, so I want to tell you guys a little bit about the town I grew up in. I grew up in Palo Alto, which is a town in the Bay Area. It's pretty liberal, but whatever. It's got its issues, of course, with a lot of like very rich and wealthy. It's a pretty wealthy town, a lot of scholars. It's where Stanford University is. My parents met there. That's why we live there. But with a lot of towns like that, there's a lot of privilege, and there's a lot of unchecked privilege, even if it's a liberal town. So I'm acknowledging the flaws of the town for sure. But what I did like about it was how open-minded the majority of the town was, and the majority of my school was. Like, we had a great GSA, that's Gay Straight Alliance, kind of like the, I think there's a version of it in college, but basically very cool. I recognize that not every high school has a Gay Straight Alliance, and it was like a prominent one, like a big one. Like, they had big events, they went to Pride, they did the marches. So we had that, and like, this is how liberal it was. The Westboro Baptist Church protested at our high school just because it was like, they were like, oh, this school is so gay. We need to protest it. Weird how I went to like pretty gay high school, pretty gay college, and I didn't discover I was gay till I graduated. But anyways, kind of like comedy. I didn't really discover I was a comedian or want to do comedy till I graduated. And I really missed out on that, man. But here we are. Okay, let's continue the story. So I grew up in Palo Alto, and in my high school, I'm telling you all this because my high school is very progressive for a high school. Obviously we had our shortcomings, but for high school, we were very progressive, and our valedictorian, they weren't called valedictorians because they weren't picked based on grades, but every year the senior class at graduation would sort of award like a key, like I think there's a name for it, but I don't remember. It was like a something award named after some alumni. Let's just call it the MC Hammer Award. I know that's not what it's called, but MC Hammer was an alumni, I believe. And you know what? Actually, speaking of which, the guy, Stephen Jenkins, oh my God, I blinked on his name for a second, and I love Third Eye Blind. I did a podcast defending Third Eye Blind. Stephen Jenkins was an alumni of our high school. So let's just call it the Stephen Jenkins Award, even though I definitely know that's not true. The Stephen Jenkins Award was awarded to one graduating girl and one graduating boy. I'm saying girl and boy because we were in high school, so that's what we were. Every year. And it wasn't based on grades, but it's sort of like an all-around best student, sort of like a little bit of like kind of like representative of the entire graduating class. So the year I graduated, the award for the boy was given to a trans boy, and he was actually in transition. When I had met him, he was already going by his male identity, but a lot of the kids, because I transferred into the school, a lot of the kids at my school grew up with him and knew him as his female identity before he was transitioning, and everybody was very accepting, and he was so nice and great, and it was just a very warm and accepting school. And I just remember like one time someone telling me that about him so that I would know, because I was like, oh, because one time someone accidentally called, I won't use names, but one time someone accidentally called him by his female name because they had grown up together, and then corrected herself, and I was like, why did you do that? And then so she explained it to me, and I remember being like, oh, cool. Like, it wasn't even a thing. It was just, and it shouldn't be. But in high school, in the time I was going to high school, we definitely weren't as open as a country about this. So telling you all this to tell you that I went to progressive high school and I had experience with this. And so when I saw this website and I had this sort of like emotional moment realizing like, oh my God, I'm a boy, I thought about reaching out to him because I was like, wow, he's someone who went through this so early in high school. I just want to ask and talk to somebody. And I didn't do that because I chickened out. And what I ended up doing was spending a lot more time on blogs and forums. And one of the big things I saw, like, sort of, there's a lot of people have different experiences, but one of the questions that came up for me was, how do I tell my friends? And, how are my relationships going to change after I transition? So people described it as like, there were people saying like best friends of people who had transitioned, and they said stuff like, they're very supportive, but you kind of think of it as two people, right? Like, knowing the person before transition, after, it almost feels like you're just knowing two people. It's sort of continuation, but it's not going to be like so seamless or like, hey guys, I'm exactly the same. Because you're not. You're more yourself, but it's like you're wearing a mask and you're more yourself. So this was all very interesting. And at the time, I was also still a virgin. So what I did, how I am as a virgin is I hang on to every single hookup I've ever had. That's just how I was as a virgin. So I kind of ran through my mind telling all the guys I'd ever hooked up with this news. And I was like, how are they going to take it? Am I going to freak them out? But then like, I kind of really like, I'm just telling you this to let you guys know how far I went with this. I was like really thinking about this and being like, and it was really, really comforting to, throughout all this, to know I wasn't alone, because I can only imagine how scary it is to question, right? Because it ended up, this wasn't my path, but to even question yourself, your identity, and be alone in a small town and not know that anybody else thinks this. And so I'm very grateful that I was in a very accepting, safe space, open. Like if I wanted to talk to my friends about it, I could have. I was definitely in a place where I wanted to figure it out for myself before I really told anyone, because I know it's pretty big news. So that was all summer. Then I come back to school and I felt comfortable enough at that point to tell people I was questioning, but I wasn't telling people I was like, I definitely think I'm a boy. I was telling people I was questioning my sexuality, which is true, because every time I looked in the mirror, I was like, I'm a gay boy. I like boys. I like gay boys. I do. I mean, they're all nice, but at the time I was like, I'm a gay boy. I like gay boys. And I was like, but also sometimes I think about women. So maybe that's the part of me that's a man. Anyways, and you might ask, why in all this were you not like, you're bisexual? I don't know. Okay. I don't know how the brain works. It just didn't work at the time. So come to think of it, very much all of me questioning my sexuality could have been one of the reasons I waited so long to have sex. I think I just wasn't ready, and I didn't like, I just didn't really want to have, I mean, I thought I did, and I just wasn't ready. Right. So junior year, still a virgin, I start questioning, and I start telling my closest friends, I'm questioning my sexuality. I don't know. And then they were very open with me, and most of them were like, okay, cool. Well, let us know when you figure it out. They didn't say it in a mean way, but it's kind of like, cool. Well, we're here no matter what. And then that year was when I really, like, I was still drinking. And so I definitely would get drunk and explore a little bit more my sexuality, as in, maybe hook up with girls and, that sort of thing. And I've talked about this on the podcast already, but the first time I hooked up with a girl, I was blackout drunk. Don't recommend, because, I heard she was hot, but I don't remember it. So that was when I was starting to be like, all right, well, I started shifting away from the thinking I was a boy, because I really started feeling more like, okay, I really need to explore this attraction to women. And the more that I did, it took me a while to come out to myself, but the more that I did, the more that it felt right. And I realized, and I kind of just, honestly, it's weird to talk about this now, because there wasn't a moment where I was like, guess I'm not a boy. I honestly just kind of like shut that all into a box in my mind and just put it away. Like, sometimes I used to, like, whenever I make fake accounts to ask dumb questions on forums, I would like go back and delete it, because I'd be afraid someone would find out I was asking about some like weird rash, but I don't even know if those accounts exist. I was like making fake emails and accounts so I could ask questions. I just like completely put it in a box and was like, oh, that's gone. And not because I was ashamed. I think I was just like, it was more like, oh, I was wrong, or not wrong, but this isn't it. And I had gone so deep in that path that I was like, well, just kind of cold turkey, put that away and explore this new thing. And then, obviously the coming out for me was a lot slower, but more right. Like I kind of just like was questioning junior year, and then I ended up having a boyfriend senior year. So then I kind of put the questioning thing on pause. But if I'm remembering correctly, he was the first person I came out to. So I came out after college, and it was like, oh, I'm gay. Oh my, and then I was like, that's it, I'm gay. And then you guys have heard this, but then I ended up dating another man, and I was like, well, I guess I'm not gay. And eventually, this is like I said, it took a while for me to come out. Eventually, I was like, all right, you know what? I'm just bi. I'm not even going to try to pin this down. So, wow, I'm sorry that this story wasn't very well told, but basically that was a little piece of my coming out story that I never really include or tell people. And I actually don't know why. And I think maybe it's because there's so much to explain. And then it kind of like misleads you a little, because people think like, oh, she's going to tell us that she's transitioning or is trans, and then we'll be happy for her or whatever. And she's on the other side, she'll come out of it and kind of have this journey. But then I kind of like stop the journey and I'm like, oh, wrong journey. And so it kind of is like I feel like a weird story to tell, because it kind of starts back it stops where it starts, kind of like loops back around. So it feels like nothing happened. But this week, of course, I've been thinking a lot more about this, and just, it really hurts my heart to think about, people who, are just people, like friends of mine, but even if they're not friends, just people like who do go through their journey, and how hard it is for every step of that way is hard, and questioning and wondering, and the moment you realize you're different, and then the final glorious moment after you transition, you're like, I'm myself, that feeling of like, I found who I am and I can be myself. And then to have the government say they want to take it away and erase you, and that just hurts my heart. So I guess that's why I wanted to share this story. I don't know. I mean, it's so weird, because I do talk about my sexuality a lot more because of comedy. There's definitely, it definitely is, it makes it easier to talk about in the form of jokes and stories. And also it helps me, because when I talk about it on stage, people who relate to me come up to me and then share their stories. And I love hearing stories from you guys. When people come to my show, I love hearing their stories, because especially like I get queer Asian or women come up to me often after shows, because, they see me and then they want to share their side. And I love that, because I didn't really have that when I was growing up. I didn't watch comedy. And so when people come up to me and they're like, whoa, this thing you said, I am this way too. I'm like, I felt so alone. So it's really nice to feel like I'm helping someone not feel alone. I don't know. Was that a good confession? It's weird talking to you guys without anybody responding, because I'm like, oh wow, I just really feel like I got something off my chest. All right, well, I guess I'll just shut this off and edit it. But you know what? I'm going to wrap it up, because I don't want to keep you guys too long. I tend to ramble when I don't have someone to check me, but I just want to say that wherever you are in your journey, it's so important to have those safe spaces and to have open-minded people around you make you feel comfortable, because I really never felt like I was in danger, and I never felt like threatened by anybody. And I felt, even though for me I was conflicted, it was always about me finding myself and figuring out my journey. And I recognize that that's a privilege. I 100% recognize that I was privileged to have that, and that not everybody has that. And I'm very grateful to have had that. And, it doesn't mean that all my family or everybody would have necessarily supported me or accepted me like with wide open arms. Like I may have had pushback, but at no point did I ever feel like my safety was, at risk. I never felt like I was in danger. I never felt unsafe to explore this. And so I really want, I'm really grateful for that. And I just really want to be able to provide that for everyone. I think everyone deserves that. So, all right. Well, thank you guys for listening to that. Hey, if you guys like this podcast, I promise they're not all like this. There's a guest. Usually the guest has a more interesting thing to say than I do. And then we talk, and it's very nice. So if you guys like this podcast, subscribe to it. Give us a like. And I'd love to hear your reviews. I know there's a lot more people who listen that have reviewed the podcast. So if you leave a review and DM it to me, or send it. You don't have to DM it. You can tag me on Twitter or on Instagram. But I will DM you a secret confession that I've never told anyone before. I promise it will be more fun and light than this. This is just what I wanted to talk about this week. So do that. Please subscribe. Tell your friends. And yeah, that's it. All right. Goodbye.